3 deaths, 3 eras, 3 mysteries. Each story seems clear-cut, but nothing about them is clear. Ludwig disappears in the lake. Oetzi dies with an arrowhead in his back. Cleopatra chooses the final escape in her palace. 3 deaths, 3 legends, no definitive answer. Today, we take a look at what really might have happened, and why these cases continue to haunt us to this day.
We humans are just, we're hardwired for narrative. But there's a special kind of story that really grips us. The mystery. Specifically, the mystery that history just refuses to solve.
Right.
And when that mystery involves power or betrayal or a figure just frozen in time, the fascination is, well, it's absolute.
That's so right, because the deeper you get into these historical cold cases, the more you realize the real conflict isn't just between, say, a victim and a perpetrator.
Oh, that's interesting. What is it then?
It's between the verifiable evidence on one hand and the story that people wanted to believe on the other. History, especially when it deals with death, is just rife with speculation.
So we have to separate them.
We have to. We need to understand the difference between the captivating stuff, the deadly bites, the enigmatic suicides, the prehistoric shootouts, and the hard-won, often frustrating facts.
Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we are strapping in for a deep dive into 3 of history's most iconic and, frankly, baffling deaths.
A fantastic lineup.
We're going to be analyzing the final moments of King Ludwig II, the tragic Bavarian monarch. Then we've got Oetzi the Iceman, who is arguably the world's oldest and most examined murder victim.
An incredible case.
And finally, Cleopatra, the last pharaoh who orchestrated an exit so dramatic it's still debated thousands of years later.
And our mission today isn't just to, retell these famous stories.
Right, it's more than that.
It's to be well-informed. We want to extract the concrete facts from both the historical accounts and the recent scientific research. We're going to spend time with the complex evidence to understand precisely why these deaths remain unsolved.
And why the theories are so contradictory.
Exactly. Why do they contradict each other so fiercely? And what does that dynamic, that constant friction between evidence and popular narrative, what does it teach us about how we acquire knowledge?
So our goal is a shortcut to a deep understanding. We're balancing the captivating stories with the rigorous, sometimes frustrating reality of historical and scientific analysis.
A perfect way to put it.
So let's start with the fairy tale king, a mystery that is, in historical terms, barely 130 years old. We'll begin our journey in Bavaria at Neuschwanstein Castle. I mean, if you've ever seen a picture of it, it's just breathtaking.
It's the quintessential fairy tale castle.
It really is. And just to give you a sense of the scale of his legacy, this one building draws about 1.4 million visitors every single year.
Wow.
It's this enduring testament to King Ludwig II, a man who built a world designed to be magnificent, but whose life ended in immense debt and, profound mystery.
And that grandeur is the perfect entry point. Because Ludwig II, the fairy tale king, he was completely defined by this disconnect between fantasy and political reality.
He was a tragic figure.
Absolutely. A builder of these magnificent, impossible castles who wrapped up immense, unpayable debt, which led directly to his completely mysterious end.
So he came to the Bavarian throne in 1864, and he was young, right?
Barely 18 years old. He inherited the title, but you could say he didn't really inherit the temperament for what a modern monarchy required.
What do you mean by that?
Well, almost immediately, the political class started circulating rumors that he was unsuitable. Our sources describe him as Menschenscheu.
Menschenscheu.
Yeah, which literally translates to shy of people.
Yeah.
Socially withdrawn. And on top of that, he had this exaggerated, almost delusional view of his own kingship.
So he saw himself as more of an absolute monarch from a bygone era.
Precisely. And what's fascinating here is that his entire royal identity was based on this deliberate, kind of anachronistic emulation of past glories. He wasn't just building castles.
He was building a fantasy.
He was trying to model himself on the grandest monarch of them all, Louis XIV of France, the Sun King. So he focused entirely on these colossal, opulent projects like Linderhof and Herrenchiemsee, and he treated the crown as a stage for his own magnificent self-expression.
But there was a problem.
A huge one. He didn't have the Sun King's absolute power, and he definitely didn't have his treasury.
And that financial reality, it must have caught up to the fantasy very quickly. But how quickly are we talking? I mean, these projects were monumentally expensive.
They were catastrophic. By 1884, so just 20 years into his reign, He had accumulated over 8 million marks in debt.
8 million marks. I mean, it's hard to even contextualize that.
Well, let's try. To put that into perspective for you, that wasn't just a king overspending on a hobby. That amount represented nearly a full year of the total financial output of the Bavarian crown at that time.
A whole year's budget.
Almost. He was quite literally bankrupting the state's resources in the pursuit of a dream.
That is just staggering. But the situation was worse than just the money, right? The political situation was making things even more difficult. He wasn't just poor, he was politically isolated.
Absolutely crucial context there. The entire geopolitical landscape for Bavaria had shifted violently.
You're talking about the rise of Prussia.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
The 1866 German War, where the rapidly expanding power of Prussia defeated Austria and Bavaria, that was the turning point.
And what did that do to Ludwig?
It brought him this painful, undeniable awareness of Bavaria's declining importance on the European stage. He couldn't reconcile the grand destiny he felt he deserved with the reality of being, essentially, a subordinate state within a Prussian-dominated Germany.
So how did he react when he was confronted with this humiliation and political decline?
He retreated completely. He started skipping official government meetings. He stopped receiving ministers. He withdrew almost entirely from any political business.
So he just stopped being a king.
He literally ceased performing the function of a constitutional monarch. And, naturally, this behavior, combined with the crushing debt, dramatically increased the resistance against him from every side of the establishment. They were now desperate for a solution.
Because they couldn't just, as we said, fire a king. They needed a legal, justifiable way to remove a reigning monarch who was actively sinking the state financially and just ignoring his duties.
Right.
So what did the political machines settle on?
The only viable legal solution they had was a medical assessment, declaring him medically unfit to rule. And this process was, let's say it was expedited.
Mm-hmm.
And frankly, it was heavily influenced by political necessity rather than purely objective medical standards.
And the resulting diagnosis was basically used as a sledgehammer.
It was. The official medical report stated that Ludwig II was, in a very far advanced degree, mentally disturbed. Or, in the German, seelengestört.
Seelengestört.
In the 19th century, this was a pretty nebulous term that was easily applied to any eccentric or inconvenient royal figure. The diagnosis gave them the legal ground they desperately needed.
It classified his behavior as inherent madness.
Rather than political opposition, yes.
And this was the mechanism for his deposition. It was officially announced on June 10, 1886. The emotional and physical toll of this must have just been horrific for him.
It was a profound trauma and a very public humiliation. 2 days later, the fairy tale king was violently removed from his home and taken captive to Berg Castle on Starnberger Sea.
I mean, just think about that transition.
From absolute, if delusional monarch to a prisoner of the state, all based on a politically motivated medical report.
And the sources, they paint such a chilling picture of his imprisonment at Berg Castle.
They do. The castle was immediately configured like an asylum, to isolate him completely. The specific haunting detail that always sticks with me is at the door handles.
What about them?
The Tricklinken am Montier. They were removed from his chambers.
They removed the door handles?
Yes, and he was monitored around the clock. That specific act, removing the handles, is such a chilling, calculated act of humiliation. It makes the political nature of the whole thing painfully clear. He was being treated like a dangerous, unmanageable entity.
And we know he felt that shame acutely. He allegedly said during the forced transfer to Berg, "I will not survive this shame."
And tragically, he didn't. The very next day, June 13, 1886, becomes the night the mystery solidifies into the historical cold case we know today.
That evening, Ludwig and his personal physician, Dr. Bernhard von Guden, they went for a walk. Why? I mean, why did the doctor allow this? And why were they completely unaccompanied?
That remains one of the central, inexplicable questions. They went without any protection, no guards, despite the strict surveillance requirements for a deposed, supposedly mentally disturbed king. They just walked along the banks of Starnberger Sea.
And they didn't come back.
They simply did not return.
Later that evening, after a search, 2 floating corpses were discovered, the king and the doctor. And this is the moment where history immediately fractures into all these competing theories.
Exactly. The official reports about what happened are immediately contradictory, and they seem tailored for the political moment, which, of course, ensured the lasting mystery.
Okay, so let's start with the official government version, the one designed to manage the narrative.
The official narrative was a murder-suicide. Ludwig, in his madness, intended to drown himself in the lake. Dr. Gudden, attempting to fulfill his duty as physician and custodian, tried to stop him.
A struggle ensued.
Right. And in the subsequent struggle, the king drowned the doctor before drowning himself. This narrative provided a neat, if tragic, conclusion.
It protected the politicians who deposed him.
It absolutely did. It showed the king was uncontrollable and unstable until the bitter end.
But the absence of a transparent, objective investigation, a proper autopsy, for example, that allowed all these alternative theories to just flourish immediately.
Of course.
What are the major alternatives that challenge the official drowning and suicide story?
Well, there are two main threads that really challenge that suicide narrative. The first suggests that the king suffered a sudden, acute heart attack while he was trying to escape.
Is that plausible?
Medically, yes. Given the immense emotional and physical stress, the shock of the cold water, it's certainly plausible. But it conveniently explains the king's death.
But not the doctor's.
Exactly. Not how the doctor died, unless Gudden also happened to have a heart attack or was overpowered by the king in a struggle and then drowned on his own. It gets messy.
And the second, far more dramatic theory, the one that really keeps this case alive.
Contract killing. The theory that the king was shot.
An assassination.
Yes. This implies a political assassination carried out by those who feared his continued existence. They might have worried he would try to rally support, or perhaps they feared he would expose the thinly veiled political theater of his deposition.
Is there any actual evidence that supports the assassination theory? Anything concrete?
We have contradictory reports. Some mention finding a bullet hole in the king's coat. Now, this evidence was suppressed or at least disputed by the authorities at the time.
Of course it was.
But the sheer speed and convenience of the official suicide ruling, combined with that lack of transparency, it just fueled the idea that his opponents needed him gone permanently.
So the key takeaway here is that the ambiguity wasn't accidental. It feels like it was manufactured.
I think that's right.
The official story had to be immediate, it had to be simple, and it had to frame the king as mad to justify the deposition.
Precisely. The reports remain contradictory. We have the politically convenient version, the accidental cardiac arrest version, and the assassination version. And because a definitive, impartial investigation was never allowed to proceed, Ludwig's passing remains an unconfirmed mystery, cemented in history as a question mark, not a conclusion.
And that ambiguity ensures the tragic figure of the fairy tale king remains absolutely alive in our popular imagination. We're going to jump now from a 19th century royal mystery defined by political cover-ups to a case that is over 5,000 years old. We're moving high up into the Earth-stellar Alps.
A completely different world.
This is where scientific forensic detail meets, prehistory.
And the sensation of the find back in 1991, you really can't overstate it. Hikers just stumbled upon an ice mummy, perfectly preserved, dating back to the Copper Age.
It wasn't just a skeleton.
No, not at all. This wasn't a skeleton or an artifact. It was a nearly intact human being, frozen in the exact moment of his death millennia ago. This is Oetzi the Iceman.
And because of that incredible ice preservation, scientists have spent decades just extracting massive amounts of information about his life. He's become the most studied prehistoric human ever found.
We know an almost unbelievable amount about him. He was a small man for his time, about 1.6 meters tall, and pretty slight in build. At roughly 45 years old, he would have been considered an elder, a senior in the Copper Age.
And we know more than just his age and height.
Oh, much more. We know his genetic code, we know his last meal, he ate goat meat and einkorn wheat. We even know he had brown eyes and was lactose intolerant.
It's incredible, but the insights into his physical state also paint this vivid picture of constant, unrelenting hardship. What does his body tell us about the grueling existence he must have led?
Yeah, they found compelling evidence of a really difficult life. His lungs were sooty, likely from living near open fires his whole life. He had damage from frostbite on his foot, indicating severe cold exposure.
He lived a tough life.
A very tough life. And crucially, multiple healed bone fractures, which suggests he had endured severe trauma and physical struggle multiple times in his life. This was a man who was used to violence and enduring harsh conditions.
And that hardship leads directly to the core speculation about who he was, what his role in society was. Was he simply a wandering shepherd, or something more significant?
That's the big question. The standard theory is the wandering shepherd, traveling the high pastures seasonally. But others point to the evidence on his body, specifically the numerous carefully placed tattoos.
The tattoos, why are they so significant?
Well, they weren't decorative in the way we think of them today. They appear to correspond precisely to traditional acupuncture points.
Really?
Yes, which has led some researchers to theorize that he was actually a shaman, or maybe an elder healer. Perhaps he was traveling to the high mountains for ritualistic or medicinal reasons. The tattoos really strengthen that latter, more mysterious speculation.
So he might have had this specialized, respected role in his community.
It's a strong possibility. But what we do know for sure, thanks to forensic science, is that Oetzi's death was not peaceful or natural. This is where the oldest cold case truly begins its investigation.
This is the turning point.
That's the key discovery that shifted him from an archaeological find to a murder victim. Initially, when they were melting the ice around the body, they found him clutching an axe, and they just assumed he died of exposure.
A mountain accident.
Right. But further examination found a broken-off flint arrowhead lodged deep in his left shoulder area.
And the placement of that arrow hidden deep in the tissues, it suggested an unexpected strike, right? An ambush, maybe from below or behind.
Exactly. For a while, the initial conclusion seemed clear. He was shot, the arrow severed a subclavian artery, and he bled to death internally within minutes. Case closed.
But it wasn't that simple.
Not at all. If we connect this to the full forensic evidence, that simple conclusion completely falls apart.
Okay, let's talk about those other injuries that complicated the timeline, starting with the deep wound they found on his hand.
This is where the forensic sequencing becomes absolutely essential. An autopsy revealed a deep defensive cut on his hand, a severe laceration.
A defensive wound.
Yes, and crucially, researchers were able to use dating techniques on the healing process, and they reconstructed that this specific, significant injury was sustained about 48 hours before his death.
48 hours. So that tells us he wasn't just ambushed while out for a walk. This implies he was in a brutal conflict 2 days prior, somehow escaped, and was then tracked down.
Yes. The presence of that wound suggests a very serious fight, and it potentially establishes a motive for his later murder. He was running from someone he had just confronted or maybe injured.
But the sequencing gets even more complicated when we consider the final brutal pieces of evidence.
Head trauma.
The head trauma.
Precisely. Oetzi suffered severe blows to the head shortly before he died. Advanced CT scans showed trauma consistent with a massive blunt force impact, likely caused by a rock or a heavy club. This indicates a close-quarters assault, not just an arrow shot from a distance.
Okay, so we have 3 major events. The fight 2 days prior, the arrow ambush, and then a final brutal blow to the head. That raises a critical question. What was the precise sequence in his final moments?
Right.
Did the fatal close combat happen after the arrow shot? Meaning his assailant tracked him down and, finished the job.
That is the dominant theory. That the attacker tracked him, fired the arrow to immobilize him, and then closed the distance to ensure he was dead, perhaps delivering that final blow to the head.
But the physical evidence provides a contradiction, right? A confusion that researchers call the positioning paradox.
It does, yes.
Explain that paradox, because it's a fascinating piece of deductive reasoning on the part of the scientists.
Okay, so if Oetzi suffered a powerful frontal blow to the head, a blow that would incapacitate him, he should have fallen backward.
Makes sense.
Yet his body was found lying face down in the ice. If he was dead before he hit the ground, he should have stayed where the blow dropped him.
Right. If you're hit hard from the front, you don't usually land face down. So how do researchers account for the body being turned over?
This leads to one of the most compelling theories about the attacker's mindset. Researchers theorize that his attacker, or possibly attackers, may have deliberately turned the body over after he died or was incapacitated.
But why? Why bother with the body if the job is done?
To retrieve the arrow, the flint arrowhead, which was broken off and lodged deep in his shoulder, was an incredibly valuable resource in the Copper Age. These weapons were painstakingly crafted.
So it's about recovering a resource.
It's about recovering a resource and removing evidence. If the killer recovered the shaft of the arrow, they removed the most obvious piece of evidence, linking them to the crime, and they recovered a piece of valuable technology. This makes the act less about simple murder and more about a calculated attack.
Cold-blooded efficiency spanning 5,000 years.
It is.
But the identity of the attacker remains completely unclear. We have the wound from the conflict, the arrow, and the final blow.
Indeed. And some researchers initially theorized he faced multiple adversaries. They pointed to various bloodstains found on his clothing, human blood. Not his own, but belonging to at least 2 other individuals.
Wait a minute. If there's blood from 2 other people on his clothes, isn't that proof? Proof he was ambushed by multiple assailants?
Well, It's not necessarily conclusive, and this is where we have to inject some critical skepticism based on the source material.
Okay.
While multiple bloodstains could imply multiple assailants, the source material notes that such stains, from hunting, from fighting, from butchering animals, are highly likely on a man of the Neolithic age.
So it's not a smoking gun.
It's not. We can't definitively point to the stains alone and say these are the blood samples of his killers. The overall evidence suggests he was involved in multiple conflicts, potentially running away from a group, but the precise identity is lost to time.
What stands out to me is that even with 5,000 years of preservation and the full power of modern forensic science, sequencing genomes, dating wounds, CT scans, the case remains wide open.
It does. Oetzi represents the absolute pinnacle of forensic historical examination, yet his death remains a narrative defined by fragments and contradictions.
Yeah.
We have the how and the when, but the crucial who and the definitive why are still locked away in the ice.
We're going to move now from the violent ambush in the prehistoric Alps to the political maneuvering and theatrical self-staging in the heat of Egypt. We're focusing on the final hours of the last pharaoh, Cleopatra.
A huge shift, but another incredible story. Cleopatra was a political ruler, first and foremost. Her entire life was defined by one singular defining objective:
Which was?
the protection and preservation of her kingdom, Egypt. Every strategic decision she made, every alliance she formed, it all revolved around maintaining that sovereignty.
And her strategy was, well, it was brilliant political diplomacy, backed by powerful alliances with influential Roman generals, first, famously, Julius Caesar.
And critically, after Caesar's assassination, she secured her position by aligning with Marcus Antonius. At the time, Antonius was one of the most powerful men in the world. He was sharing the rule of the Roman Empire in the Second Triumvirate.
Alongside Octavian and Marcus Aemilius Lepidus.
Exactly. So her position was, initially, flawless. She had the financial backing and the military protection of Rome's eastern ruler.
Her diplomatic strategy was a huge success for Egypt, at least at first. The alliance with Antonius strengthened her kingdom, kept it secure from outright Roman annexation, and allowed her to rule independently.
It did. However, the love affair with Antonius caused increasing skepticism and eventually outright hostility back in Rome.
And Antonius's rival, Octavian, the future Augustus, he seized on that.
He was a master of political propaganda. He successfully turned the Roman public against Antonius and Cleopatra. He framed Antonius as a man who was betraying Rome, prioritizing his foreign Egyptian queen and her resources over the republic itself.
So Octavian's rhetoric was potent. He painted Cleopatra not just as a foreign queen, but as this dangerous enchantress who threatened the entire Roman way of life.
Absolutely. The political maneuvering quickly escalated. Octavian eventually convinced the Roman Senate to declare war, but not on Antonius.
No, explicitly on Cleopatra.
Explicitly on Cleopatra. And despite Antonius' support, their combined forces were ultimately defeated in a decisive naval battle, and their forces were subsequently routed.
And facing the crushing reality of total defeat and capture, Antonius chose the Roman way out.
He fell on his own sword. Cleopatra was subsequently captured by Octavian's forces.
At this moment, Cleopatra knew her fate. Octavian wasn't planning a quiet execution.
Not at all. He intended to parade her through the streets of Rome as a captive prize. It would be a massive spectacle of humiliation, symbolizing Roman dominance over the East and the final end of her dynasty.
But she refused to give him that victory.
She did. And this brings us to the famous, enduring, and deeply symbolic cobra myth.
Yes, the asp.
The narrative, cemented by historical accounts and popular culture, is that facing the prospect of being shamed in Rome, Cleopatra allegedly had a cobra smuggled into her chambers, perhaps hidden in a basket of figs in 30 BC, to kill herself and her servants.
This wasn't just suicide, though. It was a profound political and religious statement.
It was perfect staging. The cobra, the uraeus, was the ancient symbol of kingly power in Egypt. It was worn on the pharaoh's crown and embodied the powerful goddess Isis. Suicide by cobra bite was the perfect staging for a pharaoh to exit the world on her own terms.
A final act of defiance.
A powerful statement that even in defeat, she was still divine and sovereign.
But here's the critical caveat that historical analysis forces us to acknowledge. This myth was primarily passed down by the ancient author Plutarch.
And this is absolutely essential to this deep dive. Plutarch, critically, lived about 100 years after Cleopatra's death.
A whole century later.
He was relying on secondary sources, often Roman-centric, potentially biased accounts, and probably some dramatic storytelling that favored a high-stakes, symbolic end. We have to treat that source with extreme skepticism.
Especially when we confront it with modern scientific reality.
Exactly.
Okay, let's turn to the medical reality versus the historical narrative. Why do historians and scientists so profoundly doubt the snakebite theory, despite its powerful symbolism?
Because the description of her death, this beautiful, tranquil passing, it just does not match the biological process of a cobra bite.
It's not a peaceful death.
It is agonizing. The venom is neurotoxic. It causes massive swelling, severe vomiting, intense panic, and death ultimately occurs via respiratory paralysis.
Meaning you slowly suffocate while you're still conscious.
Yes. A horrifying, slow process that severely contradicts Plutarch's description of a fast and beautiful death.
A slow, painful, ugly death would completely undermine the political staging Cleopatra was aiming for.
It would. It wouldn't be a regal exit. It would be a medical spectacle. And beyond the process itself, there are major biological improbabilities related to the snake.
Such as the dry bite phenomenon.
Yes. Cobras, particularly when they're acting in defense rather than hunting, they frequently deliver dry bites. They bite without injecting venom, essentially as a warning.
So it's unreliable.
A very unreliable death mechanism. And second, the common artistic depiction shows the bite on her breast. If this were true, the fat tissue in that area would actually delay the absorption of the venom into her bloodstream, prolonging her suffering even further.
And what about the logistics of 3 people dying? It wasn't just Cleopatra who died in that chamber.
That's arguably the biggest logistical problem for the cobra theory. It is highly improbable that 3 people, Cleopatra and her handmaidens, Eris and Charmian, could all be killed effectively by a single snake, especially considering the variability of venom injection.
Not to mention hiding the snake itself.
Right. The idea of a cobra, an agile, large defensive animal in warm temperatures, remaining quietly hidden and tractable in a fruit basket while being smuggled past Roman guards is, well, it's highly unrealistic.
So if the snakebite is scientifically improbable and logistically problematic, what's the more plausible scientific and historical alternative for a quick, tranquil, and certain death?
We know from the records that Cleopatra was extremely sophisticated. She was known for her expertise in handling healing and poisonous plants, and she often tested them on prisoners.
So that knowledge points directly to the poison alternative.
It does. This theory suggests she essentially orchestrated a mass poisoning instead of a mass snake bite, using a formulation she would have carefully selected.
So a poison cocktail.
Precisely. A far more plausible suggestion is that Cleopatra and her handmaidens consumed a rapidly acting, quiet poison cocktail. For example, a mixture of the plant hemlock, which is known for inducing a peaceful paralysis, and opium, which is known for inducing sleep and tranquilization.
And why does that blend fit the historical narrative better than the snake?
Because such a mixture would allow one to fall asleep peacefully, which mimics the serene, regal passing that Plutarch described, even if Plutarch didn't know the exact means. A poison allows for a controlled, deliberate, quiet end.
It serves her objective.
It denies Octavian his spectacle. She died on her own terms, controlling the final stage of her narrative.
So, like Ludwig's end, the exact means of Cleopatra's passing remains unconfirmed. But here, the mystery is less about who did it and more about how she chose to ensure her own legacy.
I think that's right. The scientific evidence strongly favors the less dramatic, carefully administered poison, which would have allowed for a swift and peaceful death. But the powerful symbolic statement, the royal cobra, that was essential to her identity as the last pharaoh. And so the myth won out over the facts in the historical record.
Wow. Okay, we've covered 5,000 years of cold cases, spanning across continents and political eras. Let's just take a moment to integrate these 3 deeply mysterious deaths, Ludwig II, Oetzi, and Cleopatra, and connect the disparate nature of their mysteries.
What's truly fascinating here when you put them all together is that each death was a mystery, but for completely different reasons. They each rely on different kinds of contradictory evidence.
You have the historical, the forensic, and the narrative challenges.
All encapsulated in these 3 final moments, yeah.
So Ludwig II's death was immediately cloaked in political pressure. The Bavarian government needed to manage the narrative of a mad, deposed monarch to ensure political stability.
Right.
The enduring mystery there relies entirely on contradictory political reports and deliberate suppression of forensic evidence.
And then you have Oetzi. His death is a pure forensic puzzle. The mystery persists because of the sheer complexity of the violent ambush in the mountains. You had that sequencing of wounds, the 2-day-old hand laceration, the debilitating arrow shot, the final blunt force trauma.
It leaves us with a high probability of violence, but no definitive identity for the attacker, and that perplexing positioning paradox.
Exactly. And then Cleopatra's mystery is, well, it's purely narrative design. She controlled her death. She staged it for her political image, prioritizing symbolic power, the majestic cobra, over the painful biological reality.
So her end was written to deny her conqueror a victory. She made sure the less dramatic, carefully administered poison was overshadowed by the drama of the snakebite.
And this raises a really important question that cuts across all 3 centuries. Why do we allow the contradiction to stand? We often search for certainty, yet history constantly reminds us of that Benjamin Franklin quote.
Only 2 things in this world are certain: death and taxes.
Right. And what this deep dive shows us is that even death itself often leaves behind this complex, conflicting trail of information. Knowledge acquisition is constantly about sorting the appealing, simple, and dramatic narrative from the frustratingly incomplete or deliberately obscured evidence.
That's a powerful and kind of a sobering lesson. We know exactly how these people lived, their ambitions, their flaws, their achievements, but the lingering secrecy or the deliberate ambiguity surrounding their final moments ensured their legacies were cemented in enduring mystery, not simple fact.
And that leads to the final provocative thought for you, the listener, to consider. We seek definitive closure in history, but does the mystery itself, the unanswered question, the space for endless theories, the contradiction, does that contribute more to their lasting fame and cultural impact than a simple confirmed fact ever could?
Something for you to think about. The doubt, the cold case, the unresolved ending, that is often what keeps these figures eternally alive in history.